Hey, Dog Nation, I am Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. We are Go for 2 in 22, with a big old nemesis dressed in ugly orange standing in our way of that on Saturday. But listen, the only way to it is to go through it, and that's what's going to happen on Saturday. And I have never seen it like this. I have talked to so many Georgia fans this week in kind of my official capacity as host of this show, but also just friends and family. I have never, ever seen it like it is right now. This is an unprecedented level of emotion on the part of Georgia fans. Tennessee fans are also bringing their share of this too. You have to acknowledge that. It's as big as it's ever been in Sanford Stadium on Saturday, and we are ready for it. We're talking about the emotion of the moment, the challenge that's been issued to Georgia fans by Kirby Smart, the doubters that are out there that don't think you're going to be able to rise to that challenge. We're going to obviously kind of still keep doing that. But it's also the preparation part of this. What Georgia is doing to be ready for the game, how Georgia matches up with this Tennessee team. Number one in the country, according to the College Football Playoff Selection Committee. We are covering all the bases on that, including some very pointed criticism right off the top about the Georgia offense, and all of this coming ahead of the game on Saturday. We're going to try to figure out what it all means and how ready Georgia is for the mission that must be achieved. Beating the Vols, staying on track to go for 2 in 22, bring home another championship, and extend this era of greatness that some people for Georgia just simply don't think should last very long. There are a lot of people who think that Georgia ought to be happy with what they had last year, and that somehow order is going to be restored and balance is going to be regained, and that a Georgia team that over the course of decades, people had kind of gotten used to being good, not great, kind of a spectator to other people's greatness, that last year kind of changed that. There's always discomfort as it relates to change, and there are a lot of people who are very uncomfortable with the idea that the landscape has evolved this much, that now it's Georgia on top and everybody else looking at them. But it's Georgia's job on Saturday to extend that further and to say, your feelings be damned. We're moving on. We're taking care of Tennessee, and then we're knocking down everything else after that there as well. That is what's at stake here on Saturday. So we are as ready for it as we can be, and we're glad to have you with us for it too. As DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Merriweather and Tharp, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Merriweather and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. Find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I was thinking about a joke this morning, and admittedly it's not very funny, but I think it kind of applies to what we're about to talk about here. So sometimes, like, economists are looking at something with the economy, and some smart person who's got 1,000 PhDs, things like that, will kind of notice some sort of trend within the economy, and another economist will say back to him, well, sure, it works in practice, but does it work in theory? Which is not a very funny joke, I realize, but it's kind of one of those deals where a lot of economists are sort of so in love with their economic theory that they almost don't pay attention enough to what's actually working in practice. And maybe there are a lot of kind of egghead academics who are kind of like that, but sometimes economists sort of get painted with that broad brush. And I was sort of thinking about that as it relates to Georgia football, because there is a certain function for Georgia in practice that clearly seems to be working, but there are a lot of people who say, I'm not quite so sure it works in theory. Like, this seems to be working, but I'm not sure it's supposed to be working. My opinion is this. The facts tell me something different. My opinion can't be wrong. Therefore, what I'm seeing with my own eyes and what everybody else is seeing with their own eyes, therefore, it must be wrong. And everybody now going on 2 years seemingly has been trying to make sense of this. I'm talking about the Georgia offense here for a moment. And there's a guy named Jordan Rogers. You may know him, SEC network analyst. He was on a show hosted by Jake Crane. That's a media type. And on this Crane and Company show, Jordan Rogers kind of went in hard on some of the things that he doesn't like with the Georgia offense. And in a roundabout way, I guess he's trying to give Stetson Bennett a compliment, although it is of clearly the backhanded variety. But in the midst of all of this, he's kind of ripping the Georgia offense here a little bit. And I don't know that everything that Rogers says in this clip is wrong, But it is an example of what I was saying there a moment ago, that there are people who ignore what happens in practice, in other words, what's unfolding in reality, because theoretically they don't think it should be possible. And they're so narcissistic, in love with their own opinion, that they assume that the facts must be wrong because their opinion can't be wrong. And I think that Jordan Davis is a little bit, not Jordan Davis, by no means would we ever say anything bad about Jordan Davis. Jordan Rodgers, who I have no problem saying something bad about. I think that Jordan Rodgers is maybe an example of that. Now, all of this, I believe, means something as you get ready for Tennessee on Saturday. So let's kind of start with this and kind of roll our way through it. This is Jordan Rodgers on with Crane and Company. I guess it was yesterday. I saw this on social media, didn't see the show, but nonetheless, here's Jordan Rodgers.
Stetson Bennett. And here's why I like how well he's playing. And look, and I'm a guy that thinks that everybody was talking. I think he was a liability for most of last season, honestly, until the very end. But they don't have much talent outside of Brock Bowers. When you really look at this roster, and I have a little nugget that I threw out last week, that it has now been 27 quarters since a wide receiver has a reception of longer than 30 yards. And when you flip on the film, the reason is nobody's getting open. They don't have speed on the outside, and Stetson, I think, does an unbelievable job at using his eyes to manipulate defenders.
So I think there's a couple things there I want to kind of bring up. First of all, I want you to notice something. There's a rhetorical trick that some people use. In other words, there's a little bit of a way of arguing to make someone sound correct when they're really not, that you got to be very well aware of, is that Jordan Rodgers acknowledges, hey, I thought Stetson Bennett was a liability all year until the end. And what Rodgers is trying to say there is, hey, Bennett was bad until he was good. But actually, I think those of us who watch Georgia pretty closely all year would say Bennett was sort of the same guy all year long, and it eventually just worked. In other words, Bennett didn't change the end to prevent you from being wrong. You were just wrong the entire time. And Bennett was never the best quarterback in the country, but Bennett was, as Kirby Smart told you, the guy that gave Georgia the best chance to win. And you do this thing with your voice where you're like, well, I thought Bennett was a liability all year long, but then at the end of the year he wasn't. No, it's not that Bennett changed. You were just wrong, okay? And that's a very hard word for certain people in the media to admit and to acknowledge that you're just wrong, that Bennett was never the best, but he was good enough. And that's kind of the way that he played all year long. And, guys like Jordan Rodgers and certainly plenty of others have a hard time wanting to acknowledge that. However, not everything that Rodgers says in that clip I think is necessarily wrong. We would acknowledge here that Georgia probably does have a smaller contingent of proven, bona fide playmakers than some of the other teams that are contending for a national championship. I just think that's true. It's like, generally speaking, we're pretty optimistic about Georgia, on a certainly month-to-month, year-to-year basis. We're, certainly, very high on the dogs. We have a good time with the level of success that Georgia's enjoyed. But that doesn't, prevent us from acknowledging the truth that there is a smaller number of proven playmakers on this Georgia offense than perhaps what exists for other teams. I think you've probably heard me say that before. It's one of the reasons why I believe, as Jordan Davis points out, not Jordan Davis. We've talked about Jordan Davis for many years here that I guess I've got him on the brain. Jordan Rodgers, it's one of the reasons why Jordan Rodgers mentions by name Brock Bowers there. I absolutely believe that Bowers is the one truly proven playmaker that Georgia has on offense. And in a game like Saturday, I believe that Bowers needs to be a big part of it. And I think that Rodgers is not completely off base when he says, hey, after Brock Bowers, not sure what you have offensively. I think that's fair. Beyond Bowers, I'm not quite so sure who has proven what on this Georgia offense, especially with A.D. Mitchell injured, and I'm assuming likely not playing. That I think that Bowers has to have a big spotlight on him. You've heard me say that plenty of times before. But even if that's true, and I think a lot of you would probably acknowledge that it is, some of you might not, but a lot of you might. Even if that's true, I still think that there is an element of the Georgia offense that's kind of somewhat misunderstood. And when you're kind of looking at, well, how come Georgia is more than a touchdown favorite in this game when the entire world, all the folks kind of on the streets or on the internet or whatever else, when everybody seems to sort of be in love with Tennessee right now, certainly the folks in Grapevine, Texas at the College Football Playoff Selection Committee, they were in love with them, made them number one. Well, how come Georgia is more than a touchdown favorite in this game? I think a lot of this centers around the Georgia offense and kind of a little bit of a misunderstanding here. So even though Rodgers isn't wrong about all of what he's saying, he's certainly wrong about plenty. In fact, let's go into a little bit more detail here. Jordan Rodgers kind of ripping the Georgia offense, and certainly the players in that offense. Here's more from Jordan Rodgers.
He does it with his drops. He manipulates defenders. He does it with his hips. He does it with shoulder rolls. He does it with his eyes. If you have another quarterback that was not as good at that, there's just not guys open outside of – and Brock Bowers really isn't open. Neither is Darnell Washington down the field. They're making contested catches. Yeah. So I think because of the lack of – it's not really lack of scheme. I just think it's the lack of playmakers that are getting open. It's not similar at all to Hendon Hooker. I think Stetson doing a really good job of manufacturing chunk plays because there's not many big plays that are available right now.
So as I said before, the entirety of that clip, we broke up into half there a little bit, is kind of complimentary of Stetson Bennett, but it's sort of a sort of backhanded complimentary, version when it comes to a Stetson Bennett. And if you didn't know much about college football, if you're more of an NFL fan or more of a baseball fan or something like that, and you heard a guy like Rodgers saying that stuff, and you were then asked a person that doesn't really know a ton about this, hey, what would you imagine must be true of the offense in which Jordan Rodgers is describing there? I guess you'd think, well, they must be averaging 17 points a game. Or I guess you'd think, boy, they must be really scuffling. And yet those of us who've watched Georgia football closely know that isn't really the case at all, which kind of leads me to the retort I always want to give to guys like Jordan Rodgers. You say that the Georgia offense suffers from a lack of playmakers. Prove it. Show me some evidence that proves that to be true. Because there are a lot of people who sort of think that. In fact, there's some Georgia fans who sort of think that. Intuitively, sometimes we're like, gosh, it doesn't seem like there are very many people open right now. Or gosh, it sort of feels like that Georgia offensively is not quite what other teams are. Okay, prove it then. Give me some sort of tangible evidence that proves that's the case. And as many of you are aware, even though sometimes we all sort of feel that way, sometimes I sort of feel that way. When it comes to like sort of tangibly proving that there's something wrong with the Georgia offense, so much so that Jordan Rodgers would say what he said there, you're just going to be struggling to do that. Georgia, as many of you know, we've talked about this in the show a couple of times, they are second in the country in yards per game, behind only Tennessee. They are sixth in the country in points scored per game, behind just a small handful of teams. They're 42 points per game. Yesterday we were doing, at the end of our show, we do what's called an R.S. Andrews cool down. It's a time in which I sort of take comments on video. We do a version of this on podcast. We can do kind of a longer version on video. We've just kind of done that for a long time. And like on the fly yesterday, we were talking. I just sort of typed up and looked something. You ever have one of these things where you think you know one thing and the actual truth ends up being something else? We're talking about plays of 20 or more yards. We're trying to figure out, why do people believe that offenses like Ohio State are so much far better than Georgia? And some of that's because Ohio State has a first-round quarterback, a Heisman Trophy guy like C.J. Stroud. But once again, give me some sort of tangible proof that's actually adding up to a lot more than what Georgia's bringing to the table. And what I found out on the fly yesterday is that on offensive plays or 20 or more yards, Ohio State has 2 more than Georgia on the season. Like even on the so-called sort of explosive play scale, even on that, Georgia is actually measuring up pretty well with these so-called awesome offenses. Not as good as Tennessee, admittedly, but as you also know, the price that Tennessee has paid to be as explosive as it is a defense nowhere near as good as the counterpart there for Georgia. And that is why Georgia is such a big favorite in this game. And people say, well, what about Stetson Bennett? What about what happened last week against Florida? Well, Kirby Smart was asked about that this week too, and Kirby Smart, I think, gave a pretty even, measured level of analysis of what Bennett brought to the table for the good and the bad against the Gators. This is Kirby from earlier this week on the quarterback that Jordan Rodgers was just discussing there. Here's Kirby.
He did some really good things in the game, some elite things he did in the game. And he had some decisions that you wish he'd take back. And I don't know many quarterbacks that play a game that you can't say that about. You're just trying to wipe those away, because in the game of college football, including Tennessee and every team in the country, they put a ton on the quarterback to make decisions. And we do the same with Stetson. So, he's not always going to make the right decision. We just got to make the right one more times.
So Georgia, as I mentioned a moment ago, is averaging about 42 points per game, and against Florida, it scored 42 points. Georgia, I would say, is remarkably consistent when it comes to its offensive performance week to week. And last year, Georgia doesn't win the national championship if not for its offense. For everything that Georgia was defensively, they had been good defensively in previous years, but they were nowhere near as good offensively as they were a year ago. And that ability to play complementary football is one of the reasons they got it done. It probably is the reason they got it done. So fast forward to Saturday. There's no guarantee of what happens on this field. Hey, no guarantee the Georgia offense keeps humming right along the way that it is. But it is the reason that Georgia's the favorite in this game, because while Tennessee has struggled to match anything defensively that the Dogs can do, Georgia's not struggling by nearly the same measure to match what Tennessee's doing offensively. It's not quite as good, but it's not far from being as good. And maybe it doesn't seem like it's supposed to be. Maybe in theory it doesn't really work. This is a former walk-on quarterback. The wide receivers aren't former elite 5-stars necessarily. It's an offense that leans a lot on its tight ends. Maybe smart people say it shouldn't be working this way, but the stats speak for themselves. Last year, this year, and if you look and find some Georgia fans who feel pretty confident, no one's guaranteeing, at least I hope they're not, no one's guaranteeing anything for Saturday. But if you look and find some Georgia fans who are confident about this game, I think the confidence they have is born out of the understanding of this, that some things just sort of work. And somehow, some way, the Georgia offense has worked. The name I haven't mentioned yet is obviously a big part of it. Todd Monken has figured out something that just works. It's running game, it's passing game, it's throwing punches with both hands. It's 30-something points in a game like this on Saturday. And knowing what the Georgia defense is capable of, that 30-something points that the Georgia offense should be dependent on to provide, that is very likely enough to lead to a UGA victory. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We are presented by Merriweather and Tharp, and we are go for 2 in 22. And we obviously know that the big one is Saturday, a big step in that direction. If you can take down the Tennessee Vols, and it is no easy feat, but this is the moment. Moments like these, the ones we live for. So we're really excited about all of that and happy to have you with us. If you join us 9:45 for our first and 15, DawgNation.com and on the DawgNation app. 10 a.m. after that, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, Radio Noon, of course, on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref as a podcast, wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. We are so happy to have you a part of our program here today, and a big thanks to our friends at Merriweather and Tharp for making it all possible. They're your source for Georgia divorce, and obviously exciting times like this, big weekends like this are a lot of fun, but the divorce conversation is one that's not a lot of fun. I totally understand that, but it is also a reality. And so here's what I can tell you is that I think the best decision you can make in life is kind of confronting reality with whatever it provides. Maybe don't put off having a conversation that you know needs to happen. And maybe you've tried everything that can be tried to save your marriage and save your relationship. And obviously anyone in your position would want to do that. But there's also that moment when you realize everything has been tried. And I'm in a situation where things can't get better. Things are not going to get better. Well, at that point in time, the appropriate question to ask is what to do next. And our friends at Merriweather and Tharp can help you answer that question. It's not a pressure situation. They're not pushing you in a direction. They want to inform you. They want to guide you. They want to educate you. And that opportunity to learn more about all of this begins before you even hire Merriweather and Tharp to handle your divorce situation. You can find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com. That's theatlantadivorceteam.com. And when you get there, what you're going to see is a lot of free resources, blog posts, podcasts, things like that, that can really kind of sort of move you in the right direction to understand more about what's at stake for you in this particular situation. Then you can have a free initial consultation with one of those Merriweather and Tharp attorneys. And at that point in time, I think you kind of know what you need to know to make the next decision for yourself. Obviously, setting yourself up for more happiness and more enjoyment in the next season of your life. Our friends at Merriweather and Tharp can help you do that. They are your source for Georgia divorce. You can find them online, theatlantadivorceteam.com. That's theatlantadivorceteam.com to get in touch with Merriweather and Tharp. All right, we're going to get in touch with Terrence Edwards here coming up in just a little bit. A lot from Terrence on Georgia, Tennessee on Saturday. Man, oh man, it's about as big as it's ever been. I think it is bigger than it's ever been, and so we'll talk to Terrence about that here coming up in just a little bit. Before that, though, I want to go around the doghouse. And Around the Doghouse today is presented by ServPro. And I want to talk more about what Georgia is doing to get ready for Tennessee and kind of what Georgia has done. Now, we talked about offense a moment ago, and I want to kind of, I guess what we're doing here is more kind of related to the defensive side of the ball here for a moment. But the thing that makes Georgia Georgia is not necessarily what happens in the white lines. I think you kind of understand that Georgia's not a team, it's a program. And a program isn't proven 15 times on 15 Saturdays A program is proven over the course of every single day of a year. You've heard Kirby say these sort of coaching cliches, WIN, what's important now. He wants to attack the day. And obviously we always love it in Sanford Stadium when he says, please rise, it's time to attack the day. And that's always really fun. But that's kind of just sort of more for fun. That the real way you attack the day is when no one's paying attention, when people are not watching at all, when you're in the kind of the dark off season, cold of winter, dog days of summer. That's when the real work is done to make a great team. A great team is born out of a great program, and a great program operates 12 months out of the year. And some of that's related to recruiting. We understand that. This is still a Georgia team from a measurable depth standpoint, far deeper than what Tennessee is. But this is also one of those things where the readiness factor for a game like this doesn't just happen this week, and you've heard us talk about this before. We told you a few weeks ago that if you're a Georgia fan starting to get nervous about Tennessee, just know that Georgia has been thinking about Tennessee far longer than most UGA fans even realized this was going to be a big game. We gave you lots of substantial evidence a couple of weeks ago about the likelihood that Georgia was working on Tennessee some during practice, even when the players didn't realize it. Jake Fromm told us a couple of weeks ago that Georgia probably kind of sneaks this in the same way you kind of sneak some medicine in with a spoonful of sugar, that Georgia's probably snuck in some Tennessee prep a lot, and maybe even prep for like Mississippi State and some of the other kind of unusual opponents that Georgia plays this year. But Georgia's been doing that for quite some time. You've heard us tell you that before. And this week, Kirby Smart kind of explained in some more detail about exactly what some of that early prep, long-range prep, weeks ago, months ago, beginning of the year, what that's like getting ready for a game like this. Pretty thorough and, kind of candid from Kirby. Here he is on the way in which Georgia gets ready for games like this. Here's Kirby.
Yeah, we worked on them in the offseason, but we work on a lot of opponents in the offseason. We worked on them in the bye week, but we worked on 2 or 3 opponents in the bye week. It is a challenge to get ready for because they'll be the first to tell you they don't watch all of your tape because they some of it they use, some of it they don't. They have some traditional formations and traditional plays, but a lot of theirs is very different. It's very unique, and they have a plan of attack based on how you're going to play them. It's not like they haven't seen. You're not going to trick them. You're not going to show them something they hadn't seen. You got to do what you do better than what they do, and they're really good at what they do.
So this is kind of, to me, the fun thing about Georgia football. There's a little bit of an intersection here. On the one hand, you hear Kirby there talking about like the cognitive prep for a game like this. There are some things you have to know. You have to know what Tennessee's likely to do. You have to know how you're going to respond to that. You have to be aware of certain things to play a game like this. And we know, just from hearing players talk over the years, that Georgia asks a lot from its guys in terms of, hey, what do you know about your opponent? What do you know about your responsibilities? What do you know about somebody else's responsibilities? So you can also help them do the job that they're asked to do. We know that Georgia kind of asks a lot from its guys on that. But it's not just like, mental prep, because the game is obviously very, very physical. And Georgia wants to be physically tough, but an opponent like Tennessee, one of the things that makes them dangerous, and admittedly they are very dangerous coming in here on Saturday, one of the things that makes Tennessee dangerous is that they want to kind of mute some of your physicality by forcing you to get tired. They want to run you to death. They want to force you to move at a pace that you're not quite so comfortable with. And they want to see if they can limit your physicality by just making you, reach down and put your hands on your knees, or huff and puff a little bit more, or just move a little slower because you're getting tired. And once again, the same way that Georgia for quite some time has been preparing for what you need to know to play a team like Tennessee, they have also for quite some time, some very hard days, far removed from the start of the season, working very hard as well to be conditioned, to be in the kind of physical condition that a game like this requires. It's not a test you can cram for, but it's one in which Georgia's been getting ready for quite some time, and Kirby also talked about that this week.
You can't get your players in shape in 1 week. If you're not in shape, then you did something wrong long before. So we've been building towards this week in terms of, since week 1, the conditioning level of our players has been a concern every week for me. It's one of the major concerns is, are you in good enough shape? Because if you're not, you can't make it up in 1 week. So it's one of those things we work really hard on. I don't know how much other teams condition in the country, but we do a lot because I think it's really important. Unfortunately, we haven't had a lot of games where we had to play a lot of snaps. So that goes back to, if you're not playing them in the game, you better get it done during the week. And we've worked hard at it. You're going to find out on Saturday if we're in shape or not. I can promise you that, because they're going to try to get a lot of snaps in.
You've heard me say a lot this week that my sort of opinion of the game is I am optimistic yet uncertain. I totally think there's a chance that Georgia could lose. There haven't been very many regular seasons in recent years that I thought that Georgia played a game in the regular season that it could lose. I think that Saturday is one of those. If things go wrong, Georgia could be on the wrong end of the final score when it's all said and done here. Yet I'm pretty optimistic that won't happen. I am pretty optimistic that Georgia will win. And kind of some of the stuff that you're hearing from Kirby there is the source of my optimism. I have always felt like Tennessee this year was a good team. Before the year began, I even kind of predicted them to be a good team. And over the course of the season, they've proven to be an even better team than I thought they were. No denying this, Tennessee is a very good team. But here's what I'm hopeful of, and I think I'm probably going to end up finding out this is true. I'm hopeful that while Tennessee is a very good team, Georgia is a well-established, great program. And in this particular case, program beats team. Tennessee's got the quarterback. It's got the offense. It's got a lot of momentum right now. Really good team, would be a threat to beat almost anyone. But Georgia's a program, and it's a program that operates 12 months out of the year, and it recruits really talented players. It works them very hard, harder than almost any of them would ever want to work of their own choosing, all year long to be ready for a game like this. It asks them to understand things. It asks them to push past their pain point. It asks them to, as Kirby Smart uses this word a lot, strain. That Georgia's a program in which straining has become commonplace. The players learn to do more than they think they're capable of doing, and that's the backbone of the Georgia program. And so what I'm really hopeful for on Saturday is that the things that have been in place that make Georgia a great program can overtake what is obviously true for Tennessee, which is that it's a great team. But that's a short-term story. Josh Heupel's still a relatively new coach. They haven't recruited very much as of yet. They had a disastrous era just before Josh Heupel got there. And I'm sort of hoping that all of that equals good team, but, unestablished program. Whereas Georgia's also obviously a really good team, but it's a good team built on the foundation of a great program. And I'm hoping that program strength shows up in a big way on Saturday. That is Around the Doghouse, and it's presented today by our friends at ServPro. And listen, speaking of great programs, obviously our friends at ServPro understand what that's all about. They've got a great system in place for you, and you really need them if you find yourself looking at some fire damage or like water intrusion damage, things like that. These are the kinds of things that can just create a mess, and that may be true for your home where you live or your business where your livelihood is based out of. If you've got kind of damage to a piece of commercial property that you own or a home that you own, obviously you want that cleaned up, put back up, fixed up like it never even happened, and that's what the restoration specialists at ServPro have made their lives work. So my invitation to you is to check them out today. ServPro.com, that's the website. ServPro.com, S-E-R-V, ServPro.com, and connect with them. Each franchise independently owned and operated. That means you're doing business with someone who has stake in the outcome. They care about your satisfaction as much as you care about your own satisfaction, because much the same way you've got a business that serves your life there, this business serves their life there as well. So it's always fun to kind of do business with folks who kind of own that franchise and want to work to help you out on all of that. So ServPro.com is the website, S-E-R-V. Fire damage, water intrusion, whatever you're dealing with, our friends at ServPro can put it back together for you, get it cleaned up for you like it never even happened. ServPro.com for a lot more on that. All right, so before we're done on today's show, Georgia fans are once again in the spotlight going into Saturday. And once again, there are some people out there who just don't think you're capable of doing what needs to be done on Saturday, no matter how many times you've done it before. So we're going to touch on that before we say goodbye here today. We're going to get into the other big SEC game between LSU and Alabama. Some interesting stuff kind of coming out of all of that. Auburn coaching rumors are out there as well. So let's cover all of that before we're done. But for now, on everything involving Georgia and Tennessee, let's talk to a great former Dog who's going to be a part of a great celebration on Saturday. It is Terrence Edwards here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
All right, we'll say hello to Terrence Edwards here, DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. And talked about this a little bit last week. The 2002 SEC champion's going to be honored on Saturday. And, Terrence, you were at Georgia at a very interesting time. And obviously we'll get into this Saturday's game in a moment. But you were at Georgia at a very interesting time. It was a transition period when, prior to you getting there, obviously your brother Robert could tell these stories. Tennessee was one of the most important games you could play, and they were in a very, that was their kind of glory era, kind of just before you got to Athens, and you were part of that transition away from that. The Hobnail boot win in 2001, knocking off a top 10 ranked Tennessee in 2002, along the way to an SEC championship, and in a lot of ways, the Georgia program has been different ever since then. What do you remember about your time at UGA and the kind of the transition away from what had been Vol's dominance to an era in which Georgia was kind of on top in the division?
Yeah, just being able to remember, the times when my brother played, and I can remember the game that he got hurt when he was off to the races. I think Georgia was winning in the first quarter. I think Tennessee ended up coming back and winning that game. But just being able to, watch Peyton Manning and those great defenses that they had, the receivers with Joe Kent, Peerless Price, knowing Jamal Lewis at a younger age, going to see him, one of my best friends in the world, Deion Grant, leaving the Augusta area to go to Tennessee. So I just, I saw that growing up. Then once my opportunity came, we lost to them in 99 up there. I think that's when they won the championship, or maybe the year before. We lost that game, but then we went on a 3-game winning streak. And that was an important, I think, statement for the Georgia program to get over that hump. I think Tennessee and Florida was the two teams that was fighting it out every year, and we kind of got over the hump of Tennessee, and now we're over the hump on Florida. So I think that was a very important part and a historical piece to our program right now, just getting on the hump. And now we're, lately we dominated Tennessee, but I think in the last, 20 years since I've been out, it's been all Georgia, and Tennessee have only beaten us a few times in that span.
That's exactly right. And I promise we'll get to this Saturday's game, but you brought up something, some things just sort of stay with you for a long time. And for me, it's that 1995 game. That's the game in which your brother got hurt. I think that he may have taken a couple of cheap shots to the ankle there that day, if you'll allow me to say so. I think he probably did. And I really think that's a game that Georgia could have won up there. And I was a teenager in 1995 for that game. And after all these years, still remember that and still remember, what a force. Robert just came out after the South Carolina game, had 5 touchdowns on the road there at Tennessee, and you're like, man, this is a Georgia running back right here. This is kind of what you're sort of used to seeing at UGA, and obviously gets hurt, and the game kind of gets away from Georgia there in Neyland Stadium, and that's one of those from that era that just sort of stuck with me because I really did think that Georgia had a chance to win that game in Neyland back when winning at Neyland would have been a very big deal. And then, Terrence, when you look ahead to this Saturday's game, obviously, as a guy who understands the offensive side of all of this, what, I guess what kind of stands out here in terms of what Georgia needs to do, what you kind of expect to see from Tennessee, but what is kind of the key to victory for Georgia here in your mind?
I think here, just for the defensive standpoint, is just having eye discipline from the secondary. If you just go back and look at the Alabama game where their secondary probably has played the poorest that I've ever seen from a Nick Saban defense because their discipline and their communication wasn't there. Georgia communication is definitely going to be the key, especially in the secondary. And one thing that can nullify deep passes and is getting pressure on the quarterback. And we don't have to get sacks. We just have to move him off his spot so he won't be as comfortable standing there, being able to look down the field and find the open guy. So if we could get him off his spot, get him running around, not just sitting in the pocket comfortably, I think that's the formula of winning. So I think looking at the Alabama game, being able to look at games from last year, I think, Coach Smart and company is going to have a good game plan. I don't think we will see Hyatt score 5 touchdowns on us.
Yeah.
But it's going to be a very entertaining game because they're going to score points. It's going to be hard to just stop them for 4 quarters, but we just have to just continue to play. Bad things are going to happen. It's just going to be which team can get the most stops in this game. And I think Georgia has the better defense. I think we are the team that could get stops, get more stops in this game.
Why do you think, and I've asked people this week, I'm not smart enough to have the answer to this, how come Jalen Hyatt's always so open? I mean, it seems like on the 5 touchdowns he had against Alabama, it looked like Alabama had 6 guys in the field. There was nowhere near him at all. And really the Kentucky game last week was kind of a little bit like that too, where he's just, I mean, there's not a guy within 20 yards of him sometimes, it seems like. And, what are they doing to create this opportunity for him to have so much space to operate?
So if you go back and look at it, it's unprecedented the way their receivers split out. Their receivers split out 2 or 3 yards away from the sideline. So now you're putting stress on the linebackers, you're putting stress on the safeties. And they do so many switch releases that, well, like I said earlier, if your eyes are not disciplined and you're not communicating, those switch releases will hurt you. And that's what hurt Alabama, why he was so wide open so loud. Either he's going to run a go route or he's going to run a dig. And those are the 2 routes that really stress when you have your splits that wide. It stresses the safeties and it stresses the linebackers. So if the linebackers try to go out and cover the digs, they will run the football. If they try to pack the box, then that's when the windows are open for the digs and the go balls. In Tennessee, if you just look at their offense, they're completing digs and they're completing go balls and stop routes. That's what they complete. So it's an offense that stresses the defense. And if you just pay attention to this Saturday, just watch their wide splits and how many switch releases they run.
Yeah. I think that's a really interesting point. How much do you think that Georgia misses Nolan Smith in a game like this, and what do you think that Georgia does to try to replace him?
Oh, you're going to miss a lot of it. I mean, he's the emotional leader on the defense. He's the guy that's been there, done that. We're going to miss him, but, Georgia recruits for this. That's why they've been ranked in the top 2 or 3 every year, because they're bringing in guys. So now it's the next man up. Somebody else has to step up. And if you can remember last year when Robert Beal had to come in and just play. He had to come in and step up when we have a key defender out with his legal issues, and he stepped up. So it's going to be whoever that next guy's up have to come in and just do their job. You don't have to do anything spectacular. Just do your job and do it well. And but that's one of the guys that you definitely need for this game. Nolan Smith would definitely be missed.
I think there's a huge disconnect, Terrence, that exists between those who play football and those who don't, because those who don't play football only think of a football team as what happens for the 12 times we see in the regular season or in a national championship situation, the 15 times they play. But as you know, you coach now, you played, obviously growing up your entire life. As you do all of that, I think what you see is that it's the day-to-day operation that really makes football. It's weight room, it's running stadium steps, it's all of those kinds of things. And Kirby kind of talked about that this week of, hey, you can't get physically conditioned for this game in the week of the game. You better hope you've been doing it for a long time. So as someone who once went through all of this, what is that like when it's dead of winter, or when it's sort of the dog days of summer, when it feels like the football season's still a million years away and you're out there doing what is just not fun for anybody? I mean, if you're working as hard as you can, that's not going to be fun really for anybody, but it is necessary for greatness. What's that like, Terrence, going through that? And did you ever have moments during the season when you were playing where you're like, boy, I'm really glad I put in the work that I did because my job is easier now? What was that like for you?
Oh, it's grueling. It's a grind. And I think most people, if you haven't played college football, high school football, not even high school, because high school is just different than college. College is another step up. If you haven't been there, done that, you'll never understand what a college football player goes through. And that's why I try not to criticize players on social media. I try not to, say somebody sucks. I just say you just need to play better, like I did with Stetson the other day. You just need to play better. Yeah. Because I understand the time and commitment that they do put in to be the best player that they can be. And if you haven't been through that, I could give you in the winter workouts, it's 5:30 mat drills, 8 o'clock class, 12 o'clock lunch, 2 o'clock workout. Then you have dinner. Then you have 8 o'clock study hall. Like, your day is already written out. You just don't understand. From 5:30 to 8:30, 10 o'clock, you're not getting back into the bed. then you're doing it all over again. And you're putting your body to so much stress and trauma to be the best player you could be. I just wish one day we could have a fan day where you go through a week of life of a football player, and everyone can see how hard it is to be a college football player. And I know we put ourselves out there to be criticized. That's what we do. Nobody made us do it, but sometimes I wish that the common fan could go through a day life of a winter workout.
I want to ask you about the atmosphere on Saturday to close things out in a moment. Before that, though, before you join us, we heard from Jordan Rogers, the SEC network, pretty critical of the Georgia offense, what he called kind of a lack of playmakers, saying the guys aren't really getting open and, that this is an offense right now that's limited by its playmaking ability. Now, statistically, that doesn't seem to be true, but nonetheless, that's what Rogers says he sees with his own eyes. Some people would, I guess, maybe agree with that there as well. How about for you, who understands, a lot of this, having, played the position? What do you think when you hear a guy like Rogers say he doesn't see playmakers when he looks at the Georgia offense right now?
I totally disagree. I'm sure he get all 22 and get to watch more than I do, but just my eye looking at it, there are receivers open. I get a little frustrated when we see pundits on there and say they're not getting open. When you don't know the scheme, you don't know what the receiver responsibility is for. That's when I get upset. If you know the play call, if you know the read, you know everything that goes into that play. There's plays where receivers are not meant to get open. They're meant to get someone else open. So that's where I kind of get frustrated, and then that's kind of when I use my Twitter and my platform to kind of refute all those. But we'll see. We'll see what happens on Saturday if those receivers going to get open. We do have plenty of playmakers on the outside.
So I'll finish with this. I think it's the biggest game in Sanford Stadium history. Certainly it's the most expensive ticket, maybe for any game of all time in terms of the response here right now. How much of an impact do you expect these fans to make in this game on Saturday?
It's going to be probably one of the best atmospheres. I'm going to tell you, the Notre Dame, probably the best that I, as a player or a fan, the Notre Dame atmosphere was just crazy. That was the most electric that I felt in that stadium as a player or either as a fan. I think this is going to top that. I mean, you got the number one. I'm going to call it both number one ranked teams because we are ranked in the AP. They're ranked in the college football player. Two number one ranked teams going head to head. And this kind of going to determine who plays in the SEC championship game, who wins the East. So this is going to be a big game. I think I think college football rankings kind of helped the Georgia a little bit because now if you needed some motivation, you just got jumped and got sent to 3. So this is going to be some extra fuel for those guys. As athletes, we're always looking for something to get that chip on. And this is a chip that I think they're going to play off of, and hopefully they go in and play their best football.
Terrence, great to talk to you. I appreciate your perspective on Georgia football here. I know it's going to be a big day there as well as the 2002 SEC champions are honored, and we're going to see you in person at the UGA bookstore for the postgame show. Isn't that correct?
That is correct. I will be there. A couple of other teammates will be getting honored for that 2002 season, and I can't wait to get into that stadium.
And, Terrence, I really, really hope we're talking about happy stuff on Saturday. I really, really, really want this to be a happy conversation.
I do as well, and the rest of the DawgNation. I think we're going to play well. Sure. I really do. I think, no one is giving us a chance. Everyone is picking Tennessee. They're the best team. The common opponents that we played, we have played better against them. Just look at the Florida game. So I feel confident about this game. Does that mean we're going to win? No, but I feel confident that I'm going to go into this stadium thinking that we're going to win and 100% feel that we're going to win. And these guys are going to play well. I honestly do. I honestly think they're going to play well, and I think we're going to come out victorious.
Terrence, I love it. Can't wait to see you on Saturday, and we'll look forward to talking to you then.
Thank you.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Really, really good stuff from Terrence Edwards. Love his emotion, love his analysis. You got to have guys like that kind of understand what this is all about. And Terrence, I think, did a really good job of kind of telling you that if Georgia goes out there and gets the win against Tennessee, it's not earned on that day. It wasn't even earned during the week. It was earned during the year. It was earned years ago. A lot of coaches who spent a lot of time away from their families recruiting players. A lot of players who spent a lot of time, they could have been sleeping in a weight room or, running a stadium step or something like that. There is just something about wanting a little bit more. And like right now, everybody wants it. Like Tennessee wants it. Georgia wants it. Every team in the country, every player in every team, of course, in the moment, everybody wants it because it's right now. But do you have the forethought to know what you're going to want later? And I don't mean to be philosophical, but that's ultimately what life kind of comes down to. Can you fight for something a year ago that you're going to want a year from now? And that's kind of what Georgia has proven to be very good at. And obviously, if Georgia wins on Saturday, it will be a continuation of a story like that. Let's get ready to go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. I will tell you here, I try not to talk too much about my, own life because what y'all care about is Georgia football. But I had a great moment last night. And last night, my wife and I got to sit our kids down. I work a lot on the weekends. During the fall, I do high school football. Obviously, I'm in, Georgia game on Saturday, which sometimes my family goes with me, but not always able to. So I'm kind of away from home a little bit on the weekends. Since we try to kind of take Wednesday night as a time for our family to be together. We have a nice meal and, kind of spend some time together. And last night, we sat the kids down. We were able to tell them, this is a true story. This is not an ad. This is a true story. That, hey, coming up in, sometime in early 2023, we're going to take you guys on a Royal Caribbean cruise. And we had known for a while we're going to do that. You've heard me saying we've got cruise vacations coming up. But my kids did not know. They've never been on one before. And this is their first one. And I got to tell you, the joy that we got by telling them we're going to be going on Wonder of the Seas, and we're going to be going to Nassau in the Bahamas and Perfect Day Coco Cay, a beautiful private destination called Labadee in Haiti, Falmouth in Jamaica. We were able to tell them all the places that we're going on our Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. To see the big eyes, the big smile, it was, I think for my wife and me, about as good a thing as we've been able to do in quite some time. So already money well spent for us because we were able to kind of share this really fun, cool moment with our kids. And I do genuinely believe that the same kind of happiness can be there for you there as well. Even if you don't have kids, just you and that sort of special someone, having a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation to look forward to. Maybe you're thinking about the Icon of the Seas, the brand new Royal Caribbean cruise ship that's coming in January of 2024, and the way it kind of sets the standard for the cruise industry. That's kind of what Wonder of the Seas has been. It's what Icon of the Seas is going to be, where you have this like incredible, not just like water slide, but water park and all the great entertainment options and the specialty restaurants and all the way in which all of this is just going to be kind of dialed up to a new level. But that's what we love about Royal Caribbean is they kind of set the standard on all of that. And I know that you're excited. Many of you have told me that you are about the DawgNation cruise coming up in April. And hope for some of you that have kind of booked your DawgNation cruise, maybe you've told that special someone about that. Maybe there's a level of excitement for you about that that's as much it is as for my family for the one we're about to go to in a few months here there as well. So we'd love to have you join us in April. We're going to be on board Independence of the Seas, and we're going to be going to Nassau in the Bahamas and Perfect Day Coco Cay. It's a wonderful 4-night getaway, April 24th through the 28th. Our friend Jessica Slater, a travel agent, she's a terrific one. She's been specially selected for us by Royal Caribbean to help book all of your Royal Caribbean cruise travel needs. You can call her 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also find out more about the DawgNation cruise online at royaldogs.com. That is royaldogs.com. All right, we have not talked a ton, and you would certainly understand why. We've been so busy with Georgia at Tennessee that we haven't really kind of acknowledged the fact that there is another really big game in the SEC on Saturday, and it's Alabama at LSU. Now, let me just say this for a moment. I think one of the fun things about debating the playoff rankings is kind of looking for the potential conspiracies. And I say potential because, honestly, most of this kind of stuff is not quite that way. But a lot of us have antennas up. Admittedly, I do there as well. Hard not to notice that LSU, 15th in the AP poll, was 10th in the college football playoff top 25. So that means with a stroke of a pen, ESPN, who televises the playoff top 25, also televising Alabama-Tennessee, with the stroke of a pen, they created a top 10 matchup for themselves on Saturday night, despite the fact that LSU's already lost twice this year. And Georgia-Tennessee, which is not on an ESPN-owned property, it's on CBS, they were denied the chance to have 1 versus 2 in some form or fashion. Now, it's 1 versus 2 via the AP poll, but given the top 25 college football playoff poll, Georgia-Tennessee not 1 versus 2. So somehow, some way, the ESPN televised top 25 benefits their football game to be televised on their network, and not quite so beneficial to the game that's going to be televised on another network. Maybe that's just a coincidence, who knows, but hard not to notice. The point here is there are a couple of things related to the Alabama LSU game, which I do think are kind of interesting. I saw where Nick Saban was out. Maybe you would say this is more excuse-making from him. It's not wide receivers who are hurt anymore. It's Bryce Young who's been limited. And I saw a quote from Saban at some point this week where he's like, it's not fair to evaluate our offense right now because Bryce Young hasn't been fully healthy. I mean, I'm just telling you, man, there's always some reason that Alabama's not quite, it's rebuilding year, it's wide receivers are injured, now it's Bryce Young, whatever else. And so I guess Saban will tell us when it's okay to evaluate Alabama. I guess Saban will tell us which games that Alabama's going to play that counts. I don't know if the Tennessee game didn't count now or not. I guess you'll have to find out more information about that coming out of Tuscaloosa. But hopefully Saban will be good enough to really notify us when he believes that the Alabama games are now counting, when it's now time to evaluate what the Crimson Tide brings to the table. Now, I'm being snarky when I say all that. My sort of official evaluation of Alabama right now is I have no idea what to expect from them on Saturday. Do you feel like you do? Because I don't. There is a chance that somewhere in sort of the skeletal remains of this program, there is still some greatness, and there is still kind of that elite factor that Alabama's obviously had for quite some time. But there's also just sort of a chance they don't. And I think that going into Tennessee, I did not view that as a possibility. Going into Tennessee, I kind of viewed Alabama as a team that was likely to assert itself. And they didn't. And you can say, well, if it were not for the penalties and if not for the late game situation, they probably would have won. But in terms of what Alabama is, I don't think you can explain that away. I think you can look at Alabama penalties and express some skepticism about Tennessee because that's what it took for them to win the game. But I don't think you can remove the penalty discussion in terms of how you view Alabama, skeptical or not, because that's kind of a part of their story. They're like 2-7 in their last 9 against the spread when playing away from home. That is not what Alabama used to be at all. And I just don't quite know what that means for Saturday. Maybe it's Bama still Bama, and they put up a November to remember, and they're right back in the thick of all this. Obviously ranked at number 6 in the playoff poll, playoff ranking. They are clearly still a part of the story. But I'm just not quite so sure they're that kind of team right now. And this is not me being, pro-Georgia, anti-Bama. I'm trying to be as objective as I can be. I am now kind of the point where I just don't know what Alabama's bringing to the table. And on Saturday night, hopefully in kind of celebratory fashion after a big Georgia win, I'll be very curious to see what that's all about. Now, on the flip side of this, Brian Kelly's been talking a lot lately about kind of where he is in his first year on the LSU side of things. And this is where things get really interesting for Kelly. Because in the early stages of the season, I would say that LSU, to me, did not look like a Brian Kelly team in the fact that the one thing that was always true for Kelly at Notre Dame, they had this long winning streak against unranked opponents. They had a long winning streak against teams in which they were a point spread favorite over. That the one thing that Kelly did not do at Notre Dame is didn't really lose to bad teams. That's just not something that Kelly really did. There was a certain expected level of performance that you were going to get on a week-by-week basis at Notre Dame. And in the early stages for LSU, I'm not quite so sure that was true. But now we kind of get to the portion of the season where Brian Kelly had issues at Notre Dame, and ultimately this is the reason he left South Bend. Brian Kelly, I think, became just fully aware that he was never winning a national championship at Notre Dame. He was not going to get the kind of talent that made that a possibility. In the playoff in 2019, 2020, essentially blown out in both years. You go back and look at sort of home and home against Georgia. When it comes to playing big teams, when it comes to playing more talented teams, those were just not the kinds of games that Brian Kelly was proving capable of winning at Notre Dame. He is a good coach. The avoidance of bad losses is proof of that. But in terms of being able to do more than expected, in terms of being able to exceed expectations with the Fighting Irish, that's not what Kelly was doing. So all of a sudden, here he is now, a couple touchdown underdog at home with an Alabama team that might be reeling. Can Brian Kelly put his stamp on this game? Can Brian Kelly reintroduce himself to the SEC? Because remember, this was a pretty embarrassing rollout for him as LSU coach. He had the weird family, press conference, not press conference, it was like really a speech from a basketball game where it seemed like he was trying to be something that he wasn't, and it seemed like, Kelly, one of these guys that sometimes you're not quite so sure he's comfortable in his own skin, and that was kind of the rollout for him as LSU coach. It didn't go well. I don't think that Kelly ever particularly explained that very well. Well, now here's a chance for him to reintroduce himself, and a chance for him to show that he's just kind of a little bit sharper in terms of how he's operating the LSU program than what Ed Orgeron was, or maybe what Les Miles was before that. And, even though those were national championship coaches, they didn't prove to have a lot of staying power. And Kelly can now prove that about himself. He can combine the professionalism that he showed at Notre Dame, and I believe that he did show that, with the excellence that LSU is going to demand from its coach. And we haven't seen excellence yet from LSU, but ranked in the top 10 of the playoff poll, looking at a chance to maybe, do something against Alabama on Saturday. It is a chance for Kelly to introduce some of that. I do think this is a really big game with that in mind. One more thing here as we're cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. I saw where Lane Kiffin, during the SEC coaches teleconference on Wednesday, was asked about the Auburn job. For the most part, he kind of sidestepped that. In one media availability this week, you can have also mentioned the idea of Deion Sanders for the Auburn job, and he thought that Sanders would do well for that. So I do think that this year you're going to see something different than you saw a year ago. Lane Kiffin has kind of always been a very interesting coach with media and fans. But if you really look, we had a pretty aggressive coaching carousel last year. And any kind of serious way, Kiffin's name never really showed up in that. Wasn't a factor for, say, the Miami job or the LSU job. Some of the big jobs that came open, you didn't really see Kiffin as a huge factor in any of those jobs. In other words, the guys making hiring decisions, the people making hiring decisions, didn't seem to be as enamored with Kiffin as fans and media. This year, though, you do get the sense that things are going to be a little bit different. Everything I hear coming out of Auburn right now is that Lane Kiffin is their top choice to be the head coach at Auburn. And if it doesn't work out with Kiffin, then you start thinking about whether it be Deion Sanders or Hugh Freeze or some of the other big names that might be out there. But apparently making a serious run at a guy like Kiffin is something they want to do. And you also sort of get the impression that Kiffin might be willing to really listen. In fact, might be more than willing to listen. He might be eager to listen. And you, in one respect, say, well, why is Auburn all that much better than Ole Miss? Here's the one thing we know for Kiffin. Kiffin's not a good recruiter, and Kiffin, frankly, doesn't think he should have to recruit. At least that's the sense that I get. He's kind of made excuses a lot about how if you don't have NIL money to offer, you can't recruit high school players. Obviously, NIL is a huge factor in the sport right now. But to me, that's an oversimplification on the part of Kiffin, and as I said, kind of an excuse for why he shouldn't have to go out there and really grind on the recruiting trail. That's what I believe about Lane. But at a place like Ole Miss, just a smaller fan base, smaller booster base, if you want to really build up a lot of NIL resource, you have a hard time doing that. A place like Auburn, I think, provides a lot more of that opportunity. So if Auburn is serious about Kiffin, I believe they might be. I believe that Kiffin might be eager to hear from them. Now, sometimes these marriages don't quite work out, even when it seems like it's kind of fated to be that way, and maybe this kind of turns out to be that same way. But I do believe we'll hear a lot about Kiffin and this Auburn job, especially maybe on the other side of the Alabama game, which Ole Miss is going to play. I think it's next week. It's coming up very, very soon. So maybe on the other side of that, we'll start hearing a whole lot more about what Kiffin may want to do in terms of leaving Oxford, something that Tommy Tuberville, by the way, once did years ago. Leaving Oxford to go to Auburn, history might repeat itself in that in some form or fashion. Wouldn't be surprised if it did. We'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Now, in a moment, I want to talk directly to Georgia fans. But before that, though, speaking of Georgia fans and Georgia grads who love their university as they're spread out all across the globe, certainly all across the country, as you're thinking about Saturday's game, probably the biggest one that's ever taken place in Sanford Stadium, I want you to think about how the UGA Alumni Association can help you stay connected with your beloved alma mater and Georgia fans all across the globe, no matter where you might happen to be here right now. And the website to go to find out more about this is alumni.uga.edu. That's alumni.uga.edu. Wherever you are, whatever time of the year we're in, you can get connected back home with alumni.uga.edu. You want a game watching party? You want to call the dog somewhere where you are? They may be able to tell you more about that. You want exclusive digital downloads, video content, all of those things available for you there with the UGA Alumni Association there too. You can also get some unique kind of special gear specifically for the UGA Alumni Association by the UGA Alumni Association. So you can get a lot of that there as well. Once again, that website, alumni.uga.edu. No matter where you are, dogs never have to bark alone. The Alumni Association makes sure of that. alumni.uga.edu for more on that. All right, for a couple of minutes here. Do you remember yesterday's show? Former Tennessee quarterback Eric Ainge, who, wanted some attention, got some attention, kind of, fanning the flames for Georgia fans there on all of that. Do we have the Eric Ainge tweet from yesterday? Can we show this of what Ainge had to say? Yeah, he says, playing between the hedges is overrated. Not that loud and definitely not intimidating. It's nothing like playing in Neyland Stadium. Ainge says fall's going to be just fine in Athens. That's what Eric Ainge had to say about all that. You remember that. A lot of our golden shoe submissions are going to be related to the washed-up former Tennessee quarterback. We'll get to that here coming up in just a little bit. But to me, it's kind of really interesting. And, the point we made with this yesterday is that Eric Ainge's words here have a very back-in-my-day quality to them. Back in my day, Tennessee was good. Back in my day, we were winning in Athens. Back in my day, Georgia fans weren't doing very much. Georgia fans weren't very loud. Sanford Stadium, between the hedges, wasn't a very intimidating place to play back in my day. But as we've been saying to Ainge and Tennessee fans all week, listen, I don't know what was true in the early 2000s. I don't know what was true in the 90s. I can barely remember it was so long ago. But I do know this. A lot has changed since then. You may have unplugged and kind of gone away from college football for a while, and the attendance at Neyland Stadium, of course, the last few years would suggest a lot of Tennessee fans had checked out for quite a long time. You may have checked out, but college football didn't stop just because you were checked out. And while Eric Ainge has been busy worrying about, I guess which coach Tennessee's hiring, which coaches Tennessee's firing, all the NCAA allegations and all the embarrassment, everything that's gone on there, while he's been worried about that, whatever may have been true about Sanford State in the past, things have changed quite a bit in recent years. So I think the question on Saturday is, can Georgia rise to the challenge and show a guy like Eric Ainge about just how wrong he is? And can Georgia do in this game what it has done in previous games? I was thinking about what happened last year in the Arkansas game, and I thought that Holly Rowe, kind of doing the play-by-play work down there on the sideline, I thought that she probably did the best job during the game of describing just how loud, impactful that crowd was in what turned out to be the 37-0 win for Georgia against Arkansas, keeping in mind that was a noon start. This is what Holly Rowe said about that crowd, and maybe Eric Ainge was busy doing something else, not watching the Georgia-Arkansas game, but it is a reminder of how impactful the Georgia crowd has been before and how impactful it needs to be on Saturday. This is Holly Rowe.
Guys, I wanted to put it in perspective how noisy it actually is down here. We were at Penn State for a night whiteout with 109,000 a couple weeks ago. It was 105. Today in this end zone, it's 110 decibels, almost as loud as the New York subway.
I mean, it's so loud that you can barely even hear her speaking on ESPN last year during the game, but what she says is 110 decibels, almost as loud as a New York City subway. That's what Georgia was against Arkansas. And it's kind of nice to hear her say that on the TV broadcast because it kind of validates this, but maybe she would be, tempted to kind of exaggerate. Obviously, good stories sound good on TV. She's speaking to a lot of Georgia fans. Maybe she's tempted to exaggerate right there. Well, let me give you the perspective of someone who's not tempted to exaggerate. Let me give you the perspective of someone who does not have, any kind of reason to kind of pump up Georgia fans unnecessarily. There's a guy named John Neighbors. He's like a radio host in Arkansas with all of this chatter this week about what Eric Ainge has said, kind of getting attention even beyond the borders of just Georgia and Tennessee. I want to show you this tweet from John Neighbors, radio host in Arkansas, in response to Eric Ainge's tweet. I thought this was interesting. Neighbors says, I have never been in a college football stadium louder than Sanford Stadium at UGA last season, and it was at 11 a.m. Now, he means noon Eastern. He's living in Arkansas, so he calls it 11 a.m. But he says, it's the loudest stadium I have ever been in. That's not a Georgia guy. That's an Arkansas guy who saw his team wilt under the pressure and the heat that the Georgia crowd brought there that particular day. Eric Ainge says he's never seen it, but Eric Ainge also played like 2 decades ago. Like at this point in time, what Eric Ainge remembers from his career isn't probably all that relevant to modern times. But the point here is, I even heard an Atlanta radio host yesterday, a guy that I like, but nonetheless, an Atlanta radio host yesterday saying, I'm not quite so sure this Georgia crowd's going to be as loud. I'm not quite so sure they're as intimidating as the Tennessee folks are when it comes to Neyland Stadium. there are a lot of people that doubt you. There are a lot of people who believe you can't do it. And I told you yesterday, I'm trying to get you mad. I'm trying to poke you with a stick because I want you to be even louder than you were against Arkansas. And I want the crowd in this game on Saturday to be befitting of the biggest game in Sanford Stadium history, which I believe that it is. This is a chance to impact history. One of these days, the Georgia-Tennessee game is going to be a story that we tell. And I can't wait to tell it, from the perspective of everybody in Dog Nation, coaches, players, fans, everybody coming together to vanquish this upstart foe who thought they were going to steal some of Georgia's glory and make the championship era in which Georgia's currently living short-lived. And that fans stood up alongside the players that play, the coaches that coach, to prevent all of that from happening. There are a lot of people who believe you can't do it. But on Saturday, I think it's a chance for you to show exactly what Dog Nation is all about. Oh, by the way, before we wrap up here there as well, let me also give one more quick shout out there as well to the Durham Law Group, because if you're hurt or injured in an accident, the Durham Law Group doesn't just practice personal injury law, they define it. And what that means is that for you, there's no fees, there's no expenses unless you win. In other words, Durham Law Group wants a positive outcome for you, and if you get a positive outcome, then they'll get a positive outcome. But if you don't get one, they don't want one. So that's what they're all about. So you can give them a call, 844-4GA-HURT. That's 844-4GA-HURT. You can also find them online at georgiahurt.com. That is georgiahurt.com. All right, speaking of Eric Ainge, a lot of our golden shoes related to him here today, and we have a lot of these to give out. Let's bring that music down just a little bit if you don't mind. We love the fight song. Hope it's playing loud on Saturday, but I'll take it a little less loud here for right now. Let's roll through some of these golden shoes here for a moment. By the way, how about D Spires 1985 sending this to me saying, I figured you'd appreciate this. It's Bam Bam Bigelow as the Georgia G doing a big splash off the top road on some Tennessee jobber, which I'm all about there. I like that. The Beast from the East representing Asbury Park all the way to Athens, Georgia here. So I'll definitely give that a golden shoe because we love the idea of coming off the top rope on the miserable Vols on Saturday. How about our next golden shoe here? You don't see very many knockout punches thrown harder than this. Jared shared this with me. He says this has to be golden shoe worthy. There's a guy named ChanceDog19 on Twitter. I've referenced him on the show before. Some of you know who he is. So his response to the Eric Ainge tweet we've been talking about was when Ainge talked about how intimidating Neyland Stadium is. Chance shared this Neyland. A lot of y'all have seen this by now if you're on Twitter. And it's an overhead shot of the game from 2017 with Georgia up 41-0. That's as close to a kill shot as a knockout punch as you're going to get on social media. Chance is a good Twitterer, and that's an example of that. So I appreciate Jared for sharing that with me. That's really well done. Probably my favorite one, though, is J-Rake T, because he uses a very popular meme very, very well, because like the point we keep making about Eric Ainge is nobody cares what was true in 2004. There's about half of our audience that has no memory of games in 2004. You might as well be talking about, Zippy Morocco if you're going to be talking about something that happened in 2004. Nobody cares about when Eric Ainge played. And so Jake Ray T says, it's the meme of Grandma, and she says, when I was a quarterback, Sanford Stadium wasn't all that loud. And you have the caretaker saying, sure. Now let's get you to bed, Grandma. I mean, that's about what this is. Jake Ray T nails it. Perfect meme for the perfect moment. That is absolutely very well done there by Jake. One more to share with you there, too. Bill Burton gives you this. He says, twins separated at birth. It's Josh Heupel. It's Jabba the Hutt. Typically we try to stay above the fray when it comes to making fun of personal appearances. But in this particular case, this late in the week, we're going to pull out all stops. I think Bill's right about that. I also think somehow, some way, Bill is onto something else there, too. I feel like the two coaches in this game look like they're fans. Like somehow, for better or for worse, like Kirby Smart is kind of the caricature of a Georgia fan, and I would say that Josh Heupel, in a lot of ways, is kind of the caricature of a Tennessee fan there as well. Like somehow, some way, the two coaches look like the teams that they coach, which I think is probably pretty interesting there too. So lots of great golden shoe submissions. We appreciate all of those, helping us create the good vibes needed for Saturday. We told you, I don't know that good vibes scientifically accurate, but we're trying to create all the good vibes we can around here. And oh yeah, by the way, even though we are all systems go towards go for 2 and 22 and knocking off the hated Vols on Saturday, still a little bit of time for us to have a mind towards the lousy, stinking Gators there as well. Back in Jacksonville, 359 days from right now. That is our Gator Hater Countdown. And we will see you tomorrow here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. You can also get your Dog Nation shirts there by using the QR code there on the screen. But we're happy to have you with us here for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. And I guess biggest game ever creates longest shows ever, and that was kind of a doozy. But nonetheless, we're glad to have you here for our comments. We'll kind of roll through and get as many as we can in the time that we are allowed here. Let's see what's going on. Zebulon Owen says the only 10 I see is the 10 points the Vols are going to score on Saturday. Zebulon, very well done. No Scoped says, look up Knoxville, look up Athens, and tell me which one is the cow pasture. Listen, I'm going to tell you right now, there's no comparison between the two towns. And I'm just not. There's just not a comparison. Not a comparison at all. John White says the Eric Ainge thing is nothing new. All Vols have to talk about is the past. Early 2000s, late 90s, Dog's going to keep it that way Saturday. But what's funny to me, you're right, John. I think you're absolutely right. But what's funny to me though is that like Tennessee is good right now, and the Vols fans. I mean, obviously they have every right to be very happy and energized by their team. We're not idiots. We're not going to deny that's being true. But it's sort of like they talk about it as if it's been this continuation. It's like, you don't want to come to Neyland Stadium and play. Well, as Chance pointed out on Twitter, we've actually been to Neyland Stadium. like this is not a thing in which, Georgia and Tennessee are in different conferences and somehow, we have to imagine what would it be like if Georgia ever played at Ohio State? Or can you imagine going to that crowd in Eugene, Oregon? What would it be like up there if you had to go play Dan Lanning in his backyard? Like, those are the kinds of things we have to kind of use your imagination. But this idea of Eric Ainge is like, you don't want to come in here and face the intimidating atmosphere at Neyland Stadium. Well, actually, that happened last November, and it happened the year before that, and then the year before that. Like there is a track record here. Like, I know that a lot of Vols fans have only recently returned to their team, but it's not like Tennessee hasn't existed during all of these years. Like for those of you who have like kids, or like if you work in like say like the sort of child development industry, are you familiar with the phrase object permanence? Like, babies don't have object permanence. In other words, if I showed a baby my phone, the baby wants to see my phone. But if I put the phone behind my back, the baby forgets the phone exists. And I think a lot of Tennessee fans don't have object permanence, where it's like, okay, now the keys are jingling in their face. Oh, Tennessee football is good. But when they closed their eyes and stopped pretending that Tennessee football even existed, I honestly think it went away. But like, history has been continuing all these years, which they haven't been paying attention. And we're sort of picking up now, like where all of this left off. It's not like a reboot. It's not a refresh. This is still a continuation of history. Just because you weren't paying attention doesn't mean the stories we've been telling these last few years aren't kind of a factor in how this is going to work out on Saturday there as well. By the way, the Zippy Morocco reference, terrific athlete. And you see two sports star there in UGA from 1948 to 1951. And by the way, if I had that Georgia basketball jersey, I would wear that tomorrow. Now, I'm guessing, Zippy in the pristine physical condition that he's in, that would not fit me. But I would wear that shirt tomorrow. And by the way, don't you love the era in which basketball players wore belts? I mean, you'll talk about, there's a lot of throwback fashion that becomes popular. How about the idea of a basketball player wearing a belt? That's pretty good stuff there, right there. Let's see what else. Smokey T says 1980. Now, I'm assuming this is a real Tennessee fan. Sometimes it's sort of hard to tell. But this is exactly sort of my point. Listen, Smokey T, I'm glad to have you here. Your click counts as much as anybody else's, so I'll take all the viewers I can get. But this is exactly my point. Like, Georgia won the national championship last year. Now, I don't know what Tennessee fans were doing last year, but Georgia won the national championship last year. And they also won it in 1980. You were right about that. But they won the national championship last year. Like, the last time you were talking trash with a Georgian, with a Georgia fan, 1980, boom, that was a sucker punch. 1980, boom, there wasn't much to say back in response to that. But not anymore. Like, Georgia won the national championship like 6 months ago. Like it just happened, and it may happen again. So, like, that's an example. Like, I know Tennessee's kind of back on the scene, but some of us have sort of stayed on the scene throughout all of these years. And I just think that Some of that needs to be sort of understood. Let's see what else. Derek Eady says, real Tennessee fan? Is that an actual thing? Yeah, I don't know. Let's see what else. Carter Evans says he's wearing his hobnail boots to the game on Saturday. I don't hate that. Another Tennessee fan, Bryson Collins, is here. He says ball evolves by Fitty. So there you go. Paul Moon says Rick had a great record against Tennessee. Don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, listen, here's the thing. Like, I am actually old enough to remember when Tennessee was really good. Believe it or not, I've actually been on this planet long enough to have remembered that. And so, yeah, I mean, I lived through a time in which, gosh knows, like Tennessee was tough. I mean, I left Sanford Stadium disappointed in 1998 because I thought that might be a big day for Georgia. It turned out to be a big day, big season for Tennessee. A lot of Vols fans remember that. But here's the thing that would scare you, though. That's a long time ago now. That's a long time ago now. I was still in college in 1998. I've been married for 20 years. I've got a soon-to-be 11-year-old and a 7-year-old. And when you won a national championship, I was in college. Like, I was bouncing around, young kid. And, like, I'm, like, as adult as it gets now. There are, I don't know. Aaron Bryan says Georgia hasn't played nobody, a couple days away from Tennessee being nobody. It is kind of funny how that works out. It's like, in some years, Georgia's not good because they haven't beaten a big-time non-conference opponent. And this year, Georgia beats Oregon 49-3. Oregon's ranked 8th, and you have people on ESPN. Georgia's just sort of clinging to this victory. Well, Georgia ain't clinging to nothing. Georgia's just playing whatever opponent they're playing week to week. But you do sort of get the impression that after this upcoming Saturday, Georgia's just sort of desperately clinging to 49-3 versus Oregon and desperately clinging to whatever versus Tennessee. Like, I don't know. People can just sort of say whatever they want to say. It's kind of funny. Let me go to the other comment sections here for a moment, and we'll come back over here in a minute. Let's see what else. Johnny Surf Dog says freshman phenom Malachi Stark is going to be getting interceptions. I think that's interesting. It'd be nice to have. Tennessee's really benefited this year from a big turnover margin, and smart people will tell you the turnover luck is as random as it gets. Now, not everybody agrees with that. Totally understand that, but there are a lot of people who think that's the case, and at this point, I'm not even really sure what's true. But it sure would be nice if that door swung the other direction. It really, really would. Let's see what else. Woodrow says, Ringo's making me nervous. I get where you're coming from on that, but Kirby's kind of said this before, and I believe this is probably true, is that we have a tendency to only notice cornerbacks a couple of times per game. If they get an interception, we sort of notice them for the good. If they get beat on coverage, we sort of notice them for the bad. We have a tendency not to notice them on every other play. And obviously the coaching staff gets paid to watch them a lot more closely than that. And, from that standpoint, I think they're pretty happy with the job that Ringo is doing on a per-play basis. And you say, well, I saw him get beat in this game. I saw him get beat in that game. I think he got beat against Tennessee last year, and I think that's probably true. Maybe even a couple of times, even on a couple of balls that weren't even completions. And yet, I think the thing you got to expect is if Tennessee takes as many shots they're going to take, and they're going to take a bunch of shots, then a guy like Ringo is going to probably get beat at some point in time. Laster may get beat at some point in time. You may get beat. Let's say you have, Javon Bullard in there playing star, which I'm guessing you probably see a good bit of him in a game like this. He may get beat at some point in time. Like, you're not going to bat 1,000 in a situation like this, but you just got to make sure that you succeed far more often than you fail. Because if you kind of wonder, why is offense kind of overtaking defense? At least in the minds of a lot of people. Defense, I think Georgia has proven, is very, very important. But why has offense kind of had this, it's sort of risen up in college football so much? I think one of the things that coaches have learned is that I can fail against the defense 3 times out of 4. They can beat me on this play, beat me on that play, beat me on the next play, But if that next play is an explosive, then all of a sudden I'm kind of winning. I'm failing 3 times out of 4, but because my one win is an explosive, then all of a sudden I'm in sort of a good position. And that's just kind of the nature of the sport. The path is sort of in the math, is that if you can create explosive plays, then you can overcome kind of a overall, at times, lack of efficiency, or you can kind of, overcome what might be some sort of wins or I should say some losses on kind of a per play basis. You can kind of overcome some of that. And so, that's the challenge for Georgia on Saturday. You got to line up and win per play, and you got to limit those explosives too, because that's the way in which a team like this stays in a game. Hemingway checks in to say, Hemingway's in here kind of going back and forth with somebody here right now. Jesse S. says, everyone's saying that Tennessee will beat us. I remember when everyone said Michigan would beat us. How'd that turn out? Yeah, I mean, listen, Georgia's had no shared doubters here over the course of the last year and a half. There's no doubt that's true, and they have done a good job of vanquishing a lot of those critics. L.A. Dog says, and this is kind of something we've talked about a little bit before, he says, I think the Auburn-Tennessee schedule switch may have actually worked out for the best this year, considering the stakes of the East as a counter to Alabama-LSU, and that we're not catching them sleeping. They've got our full attention. So, L.A. Dog, I think you're bringing up a really interesting point. It's something I've thought about, too, and I think we've briefly mentioned at some point in time. And I'm surprised that no one else is talking about this, but I think you're kind of getting to something that probably the league office feels really good about, is that when the schedule switch was announced, it's something that Auburn clearly wanted. And I said a lot at the time, hey, I don't want to cooperate with a Georgia rival here. If Auburn wants it, it's reason enough for me not to want it. And if Georgia's going to be forced to give it to Auburn, then Georgia ought to get something from it. And Kirby Smart's feeling wasn't nearly as strong as that. Kirby just didn't, I got the impression Kirby just didn't really care, that he was sort of fine with that. But one of the things that I think Greg McGarity said this at the time, and other folks kind of talked about, one of the reasons which the league wanted to do this, they weren't just necessarily thrilled about trying to help Auburn kind of get some distance between the Georgia game and the Alabama game. But one of the things the league office wanted is it did want to kind of backload the division games in the SEC schedule, because the SEC East is different than the SEC West. In the SEC West, most of the teams have a big rival in the division. Egg Bowl, Iron Bowl, certainly. And you kind of have a newfangled rivalry with, like, say, LSU and Texas A&M. That's kind of an end-of-season game that started to kind of mean something a little bit. Those two teams don't like each other very much. I guess Arkansas plays Missouri. That's not a huge game necessarily. But you kind of have this thing where the SEC West schedule is backloaded. LSU and Alabama always play in November. You've got Ole Miss, Alabama coming up. The schedule's kind of always been backloaded with big division games late. But one of the things that makes the SEC East schedule different is Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, and Kentucky all have in-state rivals, which are out-of-conference games. So the last game of the season is always going to be Georgia, Georgia Tech, Florida, Florida State, Kentucky, Louisville, Clemson, South Carolina. So you didn't quite have the division race late in the SEC East the way that you had it in the SEC West. Florida, Tennessee traditionally been like, say, third Saturday in September. Georgia, Tennessee had traditionally been like, say, first Saturday in October. Georgia, Florida had always been kind of around that Halloween week. That big SEC East games weren't really taking place in November. So I do believe that the league office moved Georgia, Tennessee so that you could sort of create some late season drama in the East the same way that you had historically had that in the SEC West. And as LA points out here, it could not have worked out any better. I think the league office orchestrated some bigger games late in the year in the East Division, and this is like the biggest one of all time. So I am sure there are a lot of folks in Birmingham who are very happy with what they pulled off there on that. Let me go to Facebook for a moment. On Facebook, I'm getting a few comments over here, and then we'll get ready to bounce out of here after that. Let us see. Philip Jordan Wells checking in. Travis McCullough checking in. Ryan Walker's here. Scotty Barnes. Charles Wright. Ryan Walker says, we're like the old Detroit Pistons in the 1980s. No one likes us or respects us, so we got to take W's like they did because they can't take championships away from us. Ryan, I think that's a great comparison. I really, really do. that there's a little bit of bad boys Pistons in Georgia. And as I said, it's like, people kind of want to say, this team's not explosive offensive. This team doesn't have any playmakers. And sometimes we all look around and say, so-and-so needs to be better. It'd be nice if you kind of had some of this. But if you look for statistical proof to sort of explain that, you have a hard time finding it. There's just not a lot of proof that Georgia is as bad as, guys like Jordan Rodgers would sort of suggest that UGA is. And I do think that there is a little bit of that kind of, for those of us who lived through that era of the NBA, nobody really liked the bad boys Pistons. And the folks in Detroit did kind of take that on as a little bit of a mindset a little bit. Now you see a lot of T-shirts that say so-and-so versus everybody. That's kind of a mindset that a lot of towns have about their sports team. I mean, I definitely think there was a Detroit versus everybody kind of mindset back in that era of the NBA where people just did not like the Pistons. Now, I believe the Pistons gave you plenty of reasons not to like them as someone who lived through that time. But nonetheless, I kind of get that. I do. I think that there's always going to be resistance to change. And I think that people take comfort in things being the way that they used to be. But when Georgia kind of rises up and win a national championship, if it's going to become kind of a regular thing, that's more change that people have to get kind of used to. I think some of the stuff we're hearing about Georgia fans is also kind of about that too, of, people have a hard time processing the idea of whatever Sanford Stadium used to be. I'm not here to litigate the past. But whatever it used to be, that's not the way it is right now. And Arkansas will tell you that. Auburn will tell you that. I think Kentucky last year would have told you that. I thought the South Carolina atmosphere last season for what was pretty close to a night game, I thought they would tell you that. That things have just kind of changed with Georgia, and some people don't want that change to be true. Not because they hate Georgia, it's because they hate change. But one way or another, there is an element of what Georgia does that's just not quite as fun. Everybody loves Alabama, Tennessee, so people want. I'm talking about the way in which that game was played. It was a thrilling game. People kind of want college football to be that way, and so they feel like Ohio State gives you that kind of game, Alabama gives you that kind of game, Tennessee gives you that kind of game. Georgia doesn't give you that kind of game. Georgia won the national championship 33-18. That's not the kind of thing that everybody loves to see, but it's the kind of dominance that football is really all about. That's the kind of physical control that you are trying to assert over your opponent. You're trying to physically dominate them, and that's what Georgia did in that game. So I think the comparison to those Pistons, Ryan, I think that's pretty accurate. Petey Wheatstraw says, long gone are the days where Georgia falters under the pressure of big games. Kirby's gotten this program to where we relish and rise up in games like this. Yeah, I think that there's certainly a track record to support what you're saying, and I really hope that continues on Saturday, but I definitely think there's a track record that would support what you're saying. Let's see what else. Doug Rayburn says the two games we didn't play well, that was a lack of experience by our youngsters. They are now ready to show everyone how they have progressed. I think there's an element of that that's probably true. It's probably not. It's probably easier said than done. I'll acknowledge that. But Kirby does talk about this. It is November now, and you have had 2 months of season to go along with if you're an early enrollee. 10, 11 months of being on campus, and that you aren't quite so much a freshman as you get later into the year. And that doesn't make it easy to go out and do this on Saturday, but it may be easier from a understanding standpoint than it would have been prior to the start of the year. I think that's right. Or early in the year. Let's see what else. Chase Smith says, never seen an undefeated national champion who's played for 2 national championships in 4 years be so disrespected again by the media. I mean, look, I think there's a part of that that's a fair thing to point out. Now, every fan base feels like the media doesn't show them any love. I totally acknowledge that. Every fan base feels like the media doesn't show them any love. But I do think that understanding that we're all tempted to assume that nobody likes our favorite team, I do think that I do hear a lot of stuff where I'm left to conclude, have you really watched this? Are you sure you're seeing what you think you're seeing? I have to confess that I think that that while we're all tempted to always think that, some of the stuff I hear sometimes about Georgia, including some of the stuff off the top of the show today, I'm left to wonder, if you were a lawyer making your case in court, would you have enough evidence to support your point of view? Sometimes I'm not quite so sure. Melinda Moe says, we've been on the biggest stage. They haven't. We're going to break them. They're not going to know what hit them. Boy, Melinda, I love that. I love that. Travis McCullough says, I'm getting 2014 vibes when Mississippi State was going, was it number one going into the Bama game. They were the first number one team ranked by the selection committee back in 2014, lost the game to Alabama. I believe they're the only number one from the first playoff in the initial playoff ranking of a given year not to make the playoff. I believe there have been two teams over the course of that span who were ranked first or second that didn't make it. But I believe that Mississippi State's the only number one not to make the playoff. I believe that may be true. So there are some historical precedent when it comes to some of these rankings. 1 versus 2 typically make the playoff, which would make Georgia at number 3 kind of interesting, kind of outside that little barrier. We've seen teams ranked as low as 16 in the first ranking eventually make it. Travis McCullough says, I am correct. Tony Dickerson says, whoever wins Saturday is in the college football playoff, whether they win the SEC or not. I think it's a strong likelihood that's true. I do think there's a strong likelihood that's true. Now, listen, Georgia's still got 2 relatively tricky road games after this. So it's not like Georgia can kind of, and not that they will, but it's not like Georgia, even if it wins on Saturday, can kind of prop its feet up. But obviously the winner of this game has a very strong case for the college football playoff. Very strong. Barry Watkins says, how about game day signs for tomorrow? Yeah, I'm curious. I'd like to hear some good, clever ones. I think that's a good idea, Barry. I think it's a good idea. Brian Whitehead said, Tennessee fans hate Georgia fans barking. It's all they talk about. I think it's been kind of interesting in recent years that Georgia fans, knowing how much other fans hate the barking, now they just bark more. Like, this is one of those things where hating it and expressing your hatred for it is only causing more barking to take place. That's just the way that goes. All right, let's get a couple more here. SEC Dog says, people need to understand that these days the media puts out opinions and not facts. When you realize that nothing the talking heads say bothers you, do your own research for facts. So I'm fine with opinions. I give opinions there too. I'm not a newsman. I'm not trying to report the news. I'm expressing opinions. But here's my point. I feel like sometimes SEC Dog, and as I said before, this is not just about the Georgia thing, although in some cases I noticed this too. Here's my rule for a hot take. I want your hot take to have generated from some research that you did. What I don't want is your hot take to make it seem like you worked backwards to sort of find something that validates your point of view, because that to me is worthless. Like, I actually like hot takes. I like opinions. I want to hear everybody's opinion. At least when it comes to stuff like this, I think it's kind of fun to sort of hear the free-flowing opinions. But the ones that sort of stop me in my track and get me thinking are the ones in which it's pretty clear that someone, when someone's like, hey, I was looking at so-and-so and I saw this, I saw this, I saw this, when you have some points to back up your opinion, and based on this, I think blah, blah, blah. Now, I may not always agree with that, but I like the person that starts with some evidence that builds to a point. What I don't like is, well, I don't think so-and-so is very good, and so therefore, since I don't think that, let me find some stuff that kind of backs up what I think. That's what I don't like. That's a reverse hot take. That's opinion first, evidence to support after. I like open to any point of view, noticing the evidence, especially when that evidence comes from having actually watched the games. And then if you give me a strong hot take on the basis of some evidence that you've noticed, that's an opinion I'm willing to listen to any day of the week, whether I agree with it or not. Thomas Van Santa says, be a woof woof to you. There you go. I like that. JC says Georgia's defensive backs need to really tackle well in space this weekend. You better believe that's true, JC. A missed tackle is so devastating. When you've got everybody spread out, when you've got safeties in coverage, a missed tackle is devastating. Foster Moss mentioned the fact that my voice did make an appearance in the Georgia-Tennessee game trailer from our friends at the official site. I was very proud of that. I am honored to be included in something like that around here. Obviously, we're independent, separate from UGA. But listen, I really want Georgia to be fired up. I want fans to be fired up. I want the team to be fired up. So if my voice helps get folks fired up for that game, by all means, I am a willing participant in all hype video trailers. By the way, we have something hopefully coming on our DawgNation YouTube page about some of that kind of stuff too here this week. But if my voice can be of aid in getting the fever pitch where it needs to be for Saturday, I am ready and willing to serve. I can promise you that. But I was happy to hear that. Thank you for pointing that out. Well, let's see what else. Randy Payne checking in from Tifton, Georgia. Randy, good to have you here. SC Dog is going back to what I said a moment ago. He says, I agree with Bio what you're saying. I don't like to listen to complete nonsense. And on that point, SEC Dog, I would totally agree. Let's see what else. Carter Evans says over 40 recruits going to be at the game. How many of them are just there to be in the stadium? How many of them will be there to legitimately consider coming to UGA? Let me give you a different question. How many of them show up just to be there in the stadium and maybe change their mind over the course of 60 minutes? I don't know. It's at least a possibility. But this is what you do when you're Georgia. See, if you're like mid-level program, your tickets are limited. Your ability to kind of feed recruits might be limited. Your ability when you start thinking about a different time of the year to host official visitors might be limited. And so, therefore, you have to think about, well, does this person really want to come here or not? If you're Georgia, you don't care. You don't care. If you're a big-time recruit and you just want to watch a football game, here are 2 tickets. Even if you have to buy them, from somebody else, here's 2 tickets. We got to feed you. You're not really coming here. I hope you enjoy your meal. And it's not just because maybe one day that guy transfers, or it's not just because, hey, maybe that guy changes his mind. It's about what I've said before. How you do anything is how you do everything. And so if you roll out the red carpet for recruits that you're not even going to get, guess what? You may doubly roll out the red carpet for recruits you think you can get. That the only way to recruit's at full speed. And you don't stop to think, well, does this guy really come in here, or is he just trying to use me to get a ticket? Who cares? I don't care. I don't think Georgia cares. Maybe the guy changes his mind while he's there. There's at least 1 or 2 I'd certainly love that to be the case for. Or maybe he doesn't. But I want Georgia to be a gracious host. This is Southern hospitality. We're down here in the South. Somebody knocks on your door, you give them a glass of sweet tea, and you sit with them on the porch. Somebody wants to come to see a Georgia game in Athens. If that's an elite recruit in the recruit section, you show them a good time. That's just what Southern hospitality is all about. So this is like ultimately recruiting is a relationship business, and relationships are not transactional. You're not nice to someone because you think they're going to say yes to you. People say yes because you're nice. That's just how it goes, is that you create a warm and welcoming atmosphere, and eventually recruits respond to that. It's not transactional in that, well, I'll be good to you if you'll be good to me. No, it's you want to be good to me because I'm so good to everybody. And that's just kind of the thing that Georgia builds. Let's see what else. And then we got to get ready to go. It's late. Boy, it's late. Let's see what else. Wesley Owen says, a few years ago, I said if Kirby Smart won a national title, he could do whatever he wanted to with the world's largest outdoor cocktail party. So, Wesley, technically what I think I really said is, and honestly, we'd have to go back and listen to the tape, but what I think I really said is I don't want to hear about canceling the cocktail party until you do win a national championship. I think that's technically what I said. Now, he has. I'm still against it, but listen, whether I feel one way or another, it's probably going to happen. I mean, those who want it to change are going to get their way. That's probably going to happen. But I do really like it. I do. Our buddy Lesko Brandon. You can always expect him to take it to another level, for sure. Carter also says, do we stop the Tennessee run game and make them rely on Hooker's arm? Boy, Carter, that may be the biggest question of them all. I'm just telling you right now, and Kirby's been saying this, and I think he's right about this. This Tennessee team, by virtue of plays called, runs more than people think they do. They run it better than a lot of people think they do. They're more than 200 yards per game on the ground. And they will absolutely punish you to no end. And you know this, Carter, I know you do. They will absolutely punish you to no end if you're just going to drop a bunch of guys back in coverage. They'll make you pay for that. And it's going to be on that Georgia defensive front to step up, stop the run, and see if they can make Tennessee a pass-happy, pass-first team. Believe it or not, for as well as Tennessee throws it, you actually want them to throw it more because the more one-dimensional they become, the easier it becomes to stop the thing that they're trying to do. That's the game to me. It really is. Tennessee's going to hit a few big passing plays. If you try something that many times, of course you're going to have some success at it. That's just going to happen. But if it's pass play, soften up the box, run play, that's over. At that point in time, you've taken too many shots. It's body blows, right? It's like, you watch a boxing match, throwing the haymakers and throwing the big left hooks, things like that. But it's that sustained punch to the body over the course of a game that just sort of the match that sort of wears down a boxer. It's like you don't want to be vulnerable to those body blows if you're Georgia defensively. You just don't. And if you can prove to be stout against the run, then I think you make Tennessee play the kind of game it just doesn't want to play. For as good as Hooker is and good as these wide receivers are, they don't want to come out and throw it every single time because Josh Heupel knows that's not winning football in the SEC. He really, really does. Big Beef says the Dogs' defense is way overrated. Well, if that be the case, you got nothing to worry about. If the Georgia defense is way overrated, then you literally got nothing to worry about. I'm assuming you're a Tennessee fan or at least a Georgia hater. So pretty soon you'll be proven correct and you've got nothing to worry about. So let me congratulate you in advance. Let's see what else. Boy, it's really late. We just got to go. All right, final comments. Trippy Charlie says the Vols offense hasn't seen anything like this Dogs defense. I think we found out last year that defense still matters. It's really important. Now, you have to be good offensively, but it's really, really valuable to have a great defense. Last year, the Georgia defense was the best unit on the field in almost every game that it played. Is it the best unit on the field on Saturday? We're going to find out. Is it a fair fight at least? Certainly at least that. But it is a big day for the Georgia defense to show you what it's all about, for sure. For sure. Craig Jones also wants to see some more blitzing, like how you got after the quarterback against Bryce Young. I mean, Craig, you're right in one respect, and probably in a lot more respects too, but 2-game sample size. Alabama, December, no pass rush. Alabama, January, with pass rush. I think almost all of us in this comment section right now would say we like the one more so than the other, and the presence of the additional pass rush was a big part of that. A big part of that. I think you're 100% right. Travis McCullough, thank you for the kind words. Really appreciate that. Jennifer Stevenson Fleming saying, hard to concentrate when I'm ready for this game. It's been unusually rare in a regular season situation for me to have as much difficulty day-to-day kind of staying focused on the task at hand, knowing this thing looms on Saturday. It's just bigger than it's ever been. Bigger than it's ever been. Bill Sanders says defense still wins championships. That was proven true last year, and I believe it can be proven true again this year there as well. We will stop on that, and we will look forward to having you back here tomorrow. R.S. Andrews Cool Down online, rsandrews.com. If your water heater goes out, in many cases, R.S. Andrews can replace it for you the same day. Just make sure you find them online for a lot more on that. We will also see you back here. And check out the Atlanta Journal-Constitution there as well, ajc.com. You want to follow all the big news that's happening as you get ready towards Election Day, and Falcons in first place in the NFC South, no-hitter last night in the World Series. So many big things. You can find all that online, ajc.com. Have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp. One more big show this week, getting ready for the big game on Saturday. We'll see you then for it.